Most average health and fitness professionals, nutrition coaches, dietitians, and even medical professionals are unaware of this, and it can lead to improper decisions being made related to clients' training and nutrition. Again, just another case to be made for becoming a nutrition and metabolism specialist. Today, I'm bringing back a popular former segment, which is over or underrated. I used to do a lot of these in 2021, and sometimes it can be a great way to get some rapid fire information and just understand if the industry in general tends to overvalue certain things. Now, in the past, I've covered different diet styles, different supplements, and today we're going to be talking about a specific marker related to our metabolic health and glycemic regulation, and that is A1C. Now, sometimes health professionals, coaches will see this marker pop up a little bit more frequently, especially if a client is potentially pre-diabetic or has a history where someone has been monitoring their blood sugar regulation. It's something that is sometimes included on top of a fasted blood glucose score and a potential marker or indicator that we might want to look at when it comes to metabolic health. Now, the question is this marker under or overrated? And if so, why, when we are looking at someone's health and potentially how they're doing in terms of their insulin sensitivity? So for a quick explanation of what this marker is, it's simply a 3-month average of your blood glucose levels, or that's what it's supposed to be or supposed to accomplish. And I'll explain it a little bit more inside today's episode. As a reminder, if you're new here and you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. Same thing goes if you're in the audio feed listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please subscribe so you don't miss the show. And if you find information like this helpful for your goals, or if you're someone who's working with clients in their transformation and you use this information to create content or to help you from a coaching perspective, please support the show by dropping a 5-star rating review on audio. And on YouTube, you can give it a thumbs up and support the algorithm over there. As always, I appreciate it when you guys pay it forward and share the show with friends, followers, clients, or just your audience, in terms of social media. So when we look at A1C, there are a number of different circumstances where we can see false elevations or false decreases of A1C, leading us to believe that someone might be doing better or worse with glucose control overall. This may include certain supplements, but also common health states that our clients might be in if you're a health professional or if you're someone who's just monitoring A1C for your own health and well-being. It's important to be aware of these potential false elevations or false decreases. So first off, why might hemoglobin A1C be falsely elevated or decreased? I'll explain a little bit more about what this A1C marker is so you have a better understanding, and we'll connect it back to a little bit of what we talked about earlier in the show, and we'll come to the final conclusion of overrated or underrated and how this might apply to you. The accuracy of the A1C measurement assumes that our blood cells live an average of 120 days. However, this blood cell lifespan can vary based on some certain health conditions and some of the content inside today's episode. If our blood cells live a shorter amount of time, this can falsely decrease A1C. If they live longer, this will falsely increase A1C. I've seen this a number of times, especially when troubleshooting client cases related to insulin sensitivity, and we're frequently working on these types of things in case studies inside our nutrition and metabolism specialization program inside Metabolism School. So if you haven't checked that out, it's metabolismschool.com, and it's all about kind of connecting the dots and bridging the gap between things like macros and basic nutrition, as well as these deeper concepts related to metabolism and even more the functional medicine side of things as well. So how does it all connect in terms of our nutrition intake, our physical goals and body composition, but also considerations like longevity and performance. So if you didn't previously have that understanding that A1C could be falsely elevated or falsely decreased, you might have put too much stock in the marker when making decisions about your own nutrition, or if you're someone who works with clients, potentially using it there as well. Many other markers of glucose control would tell us if a client is insulin resistant. And if you look at their A1C, you might see a case where maybe A1C is low, but things like fasted glucose, fasting insulin, maybe even C-peptide are going the other direction. If A1C was generally low and you didn't understand sometimes the confounding variables related to A1C being falsely low or falsely high, you might think if someone had lower A1C that they have good insulin sensitivity. But, we'll dive into other reasons why, it could be falsely elevated or why it could be falsely decreased. But first understand, if it was falsely decreased and you didn't have other markers of insulin sensitivity, you might make improper determinations or decisions related to someone's nutrition or their overall activity, and whether you're going up or down with their training or things like step count, etc. So first and foremost, one of the more common things that can do this in terms of elevating A1C would be different types of anemia. Iron deficiency anemia, which can look at very low ferritin coupled with low hemoglobin and potentially low red blood cells. B12 or folate deficiency anemia could also be a role here, which if we're talking about lab markers, maybe looking at CBC and looking at MCV, understand that this podcast is for information purposes only, general education, entertainment. We can't necessarily make the determination as far as my team and I, in creating this content, we cannot determine anything related to your state of iron deficiency anemia or B12 or folate deficiency anemia, nor is any of this medical advice or a substitute for it. So talking about general patterns that we may see, but this information inside today's content alone wouldn't be enough for you to make that determination or for us to make any type of determination related to your health. These are just important patterns that need to be observed and may impact what needs to be done from a nutrition and exercise perspective. So B12 or folate deficiency anemia, again, this would be looking at CBC and look at MCV. When you see that MCV is maybe 94, 95 or higher, this would probably mean we may have a little bit higher A1C than what is appearing on labs. The next thing to consider, which is actually very common in a fit and healthy population, is a high blood urea nitrogen, especially when you're eating adequate or a little bit more than adequate protein. So blood urea nitrogen is a product of protein breakdown. So it's typically higher in people eating a higher protein diet, which totally makes sense. In a 2010 study, Homa et al. Showed that for each 3 milligram per deciliter increase over the reference range, A1C falsely elevates by an average of 0.06%. So if you consider that even a 0.1% increase in A1C is undesirable, this could lead to being worried over an A1C when we don't necessarily have to be. Other considerations would be heavy metal toxicity, particularly high levels of lead, can potentially increase A1C as well. So this would be occupational exposure more than likely. So most people don't know to look for these things in intake forms, in health history data. And this is why it's important to be more of a metabolic detective if you're someone who works with people with their training and nutrition, because a lot of folks would miss this. But let's say you're exposed to certain paint, welding, construction, car mechanics, or similar jobs, or maybe you're even living in a house with older paint. Well, this lead can potentially impact your level of heavy metal toxicity, which can falsely elevate that A1C as well. Chronic aspirin use also falsely will elevate this marker. And there was a previous study that reported a false increase of 0.2% in hemoglobin A1C of 28 non-diabetic subjects administered 200 milligrams of aspirin per day for 4 months. So what about people who are taking baby aspirin because their doctors told them to, and then they may be seeing a change in this metabolic health marker of A1C on their overall labs? This is a pretty typical dose of aspirin as well. 200 milligrams is not necessarily anything crazy. That's more of a standard dosage here, and it's currently unclear whether a baby aspirin would potentially do the same, but it is a common practice for those at risk of cardiovascular disease taking aspirin, and it is something that is provided in a Western medicine setting in a number of different cases. Similarly, on the medication front, chronic opioid use will falsely elevate A1C. This is more common than you'd think because opioids are heavily prescribed to manage pain. So be on the lookout for this in your clients, especially people who have maybe had more intensive procedures, operations, or maybe this is in more of a rehab setting. These are all possible. So it's just something to be aware of. And if you're looking at someone's health history, if you see past procedures and prescriptions, you can be aware of it and how it might be showing up in terms of their metabolic health. There are other more rare causes that you wouldn't necessarily deal with as much if you were kind of your conventional health and fitness professional. But on the medical side of things, because we do have some medical professionals that do listen to my content, people without a spleen or people with severely high triglycerides over 1800 may also see some changes in their A1C marker as well. So before we dive into all the potential for false decreases, we'll touch on a few equivocal situations that make interpretation pretty tough. Around 7% of the population carries different hemoglobin variants that would falsely decrease or increase A1C, and they're not able to be determined by routine tests. So this would potentially skew that marker. Vitamin C ingestion at 1,000 milligrams per day will either falsely increase or falsely decrease A1C, depending on the actual test used to measure A1C. Ethnicity also matters here too. So ethnic and cultural backgrounds can skew this, but Hispanic and African American and Asian individuals typically have a 0.2% higher A1C than Caucasians, even at the same average glucose level. So here's some situations where A1C may be falsely decreased, and we need to be careful here because we might assume better insulin sensitivity than we actually have, which might impact nutritional decision-making, lifestyle decisions, and movement. So anemia was mentioned earlier. There's also one specific type of anemia that could cause a false decrease, which is basically when we have the early destruction of red blood cells. Extreme endurance athletes undergo significant destruction of red blood cells during their training and events, so this category of individual would likely fall into this bucket. So if you're someone who's working on, more of a performance side of the spectrum, and you work with endurance athletes, triathletes, people doing Ironmans, maybe folks who are running marathons, and you're someone who likes to do nutrition for these individuals, well, it would be important to understand how their sport of choice and intense endurance exercise may impact the destruction of red blood cells, and how their training and events are going to impact this, as well as other markers. Most average health and fitness professionals, nutrition coaches, dietitians, and even medical professionals are unaware of this, and it can lead to improper decisions being made related to clients' training and nutrition. Again, just another case to be made for becoming a nutrition and metabolism specialist. Next up, we have another supplement. Vitamin E at doses of 300 milligrams per day or higher will cause falsely decreased levels as well. And for the last common cause of falsely decreased A1C, enlargement of one of the important immune system organs, the spleen, can also do this. Any infection can cause this, whether viral or bacterial or fungal. This could even include things like Lyme or potential stealth infections that could impact what's going on as well. So there is a little bit of a connection between the spleen and A1C here as well. There's also been states of chronic inflammation and autoimmune disease in some people that may impact the spleen. So A1C overall, while it is a useful marker and something that is used in Western medicine quite frequently, especially in pre-diabetic populations, to monitor the progression or regression of their case, potentially moving towards type 2 diabetes, A1C can have false elevations and even false decreases in the number overall, as reported by serum labs and blood chemistry. For this reason, A1C is slightly overrated when it comes to being a marker of metabolic health in more active populations, or in some unique, more functional or integrative cases, as people may describe them. For example, cases related to autoimmunity and so forth. So when looking at this marker, understand there's still value here, but if you're someone who works with endurance athletes, or you're someone who potentially does work with folks who maybe have a little bit of that heavy metal toxicity, or you're working with folks who do have autoimmune disease, we need to be careful here, as we may see changes. Also, even basic genetic differences and differences in ethnic background can contribute to potential changes in this A1C marker. So overall, this is a case where fasting insulin, fasting glucose, potentially glycomarker, C-peptide, could be other valuable markers to consider when it comes to insulin sensitivity and overall health. Fasting insulin is a little bit of a more sensitive metric. Fasting glucose can be decent, but isn't necessarily as good as fasting insulin. So you may see someone with a fasting glucose of 85 and an insulin of 3 is very different than an 85 fasting glucose with an insulin of 30. So really, we want to look at the context of the person's health overall, the markers overall, their food log, not just necessarily one thing in isolation. I see a lot of this, unfortunately, online, and even how things are taught, not only on YouTube, but on other platforms as well. You can also look at the lipid panel and triglycerides. This can be a valuable way to spot check what's going on if you had A1C and you have lipids and triglycerides, but you don't have fasting insulin. Also consider that SHBG could be a proxy for insulin sensitivity as well, since in many cases, when people are on low carb, low calorie diets, we see an increase in SHBG. And when people are experiencing insulin resistance, going higher with their calories and carbohydrate, we do see lower SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin. So remember, very low carb diets elevate that SHBG. That's not the only reason reason it could be elevated, so be sure to check for confounding variables in someone's health history and intake forms, things like birth control, general malnutrition and undereating, magnesium deficiency. All of those things can impact SHBG as well. Now, a lot of this information is stuff that people wouldn't necessarily know to look for or understand without a more precise, in-depth level of comprehension and understanding of metabolic health and biomarkers associated with it. So I wanted to record this episode because this is a marker that sometimes when people go to their primary care physician, if they ask for a little bit more in terms of labs and testing, and they're not just getting a CBC and CMP, which basically just means a blood count and a metabolic panel, contrary to popular belief, the metabolic panel, while it does have good information, isn't everything you would need to know in terms of someone's metabolic health. So for example, that would not include thyroid markers. That would not include fasting insulin. Your metabolic panel is a little bit more basic in that sense, very affordable test, a lot of good information that can be gleaned from that test. It's not to say that we shouldn't value it. It's just there are more markers that can be added to comprehensive testing to basically provide a complete picture of someone's metabolic health overall. If you enjoy this type of content and you're interested in being able to apply it in the context of transformation, the Nutrition and Metabolism Specialization program inside Metabolism School is going to be the place for you. So head over to metabolismschool.com, check it out. We've worked with coaches worldwide in helping them cultivate this more enhanced understanding of these concepts and applying it to real people, real cases, understanding nutrition and some of these important associated biomarkers that may impact decision-making, not just for athletes, but for the general lifestyle client or general population client who just wants to live longer, feel better, look better, and feel a little bit more confident overall. If you're someone in your own health and fitness journey, I wrote the book Metabolism Made Simple, Making Sense of Nutrition to Transform Your Metabolic Health as a quick start kind of guide and in-depth reference for helping you understand all of these different considerations when it comes to nutrition. While it's not as focused on things like serum labs or blood chemistry, it does talk about metabolic health and the things that you can do practically in terms of your lifestyle, your transformation, your nutrition and your movement that will help you regulate and manage these markers, even if you're not an expert at things like physiology and biochemistry. It really is making it simple, right? That's the goal of Metabolism Made Simple. So you can learn more, again, about that specialization program. That's just for health, fitness, nutrition professionals at metabolismschool.com. The book, Metabolism Made Simple, is available at metabolismmadesimple.com, or you can grab your copy on Amazon. And that's a great way to start. As always, if you found any value in this content, if it changed your perspective, if it was entertaining, helped pass the time, you were doing chores, you went for a drive, or you went for a walk, and you enjoy having this content by your side, please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating and review on audio if you're listening or watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, maybe even share it with a friend. For any audio or video content, you can always copy the URL and just paste it in a text message or a DM for someone who might find value in it. There's certainly going to be people who would benefit from learning more about A1C just because it is a marker related to metabolic health and is commonly something that we see used not only by primary care physicians, but even endocrinologists in kind of this pre-diabetes management scenario, but also for general clientele and general wellness populations too. So you can pay it forward by sharing the show. Also screenshot the show and tag me in your stories. I'm at Sam Miller Science on just about every major social platform. And I've been creating this content for several years now to translate complex concepts into leverage for your goals and really help to dispel a lot of the myths, misconceptions, and misinformation that exist in the health, fitness, and nutrition space so that people actually have some evidence-based, actionable advice that isn't solely just based on my personal opinion. We blend a lot of the evidence with practical coaching application. And as someone who's been in the industry for over 15 years and been a part of countless transformations, I'm able to take what I've seen in real life along with what we're seeing in terms of human research and evidence, combine that as well as respecting the fact that people are individuals and they have their own personal preferences, and what works uniquely for them may not be something that we broadly apply across the spectrum for everyone in their transformation. I hope you enjoyed today's show and learned something new. If you did, please pay it forward, support the show. We've had over 1 million unique downloads. If you appreciate that, the way to give us that virtual high five or fist bump is to rate and review the show and share it with a friend. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate you tuning in today, and I will talk to you in the next episode.